Okay, so there we are. Welcome, everyone. My name's Marco Clark, and I'm the Executive Director of the Holy Cross Institute at St. Edward's University. We're delighted that you have joined us this afternoon for this inaugural series, five-part series celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Brothers of St. Joseph. I'd like to begin today in prayer as we do all things. And so we pray in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The constitutions of Holy Cross recognize St. Joseph as one of our principal patrons. They also acknowledge our thoughts are not easily God's thoughts, nor our will his will. But as we listen to him and converse with him, our minds will be given to understand him and his designs. Loving Father, we know that St. Joseph may have experienced all of this as he cared for Mary and Jesus, following the example of the Brothers of Holy Cross who have modeled their ministry after that of St. Joseph. Help us to listen and respond to you and converse with you during those times when we do not understand your thoughts and your will for our lives and ministry. We pray in great gratitude for the lives of the Brothers of Holy Cross who have come before us. As men with hope to bring, they set the example and laid the foundation for Holy Cross education and continue to inspire our vocations today. Bless these brothers, those still living and those who have passed away. Bless all those who continue to minister in Holy Cross, lay and religious alike. Bless those who are on this call here today, especially our keynote speaker, Brother George Klawitter. And Lord, during this time of crisis in our world, bless our schools and our universities. May St. Joseph continue to be our guide of living a life of service and humility, and may we all continue to be disciples with hope to bring. And we make this prayer through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Again, we welcome everybody today. I'm humbled to be presenting to you the first of a five-part series honoring the history and legacy as part of the bicentennial celebration of the Brothers of St. Joseph. I want to take a moment to thank the team that has helped to bring this webinar to you today. In particular, Vice President for Institutional Advancement, Joe DiMedeiros, Denise Rocha, Karen Dix, and Sarah Dickens from the University Advancement Office, Kel Bergantz from the Advancing Conference Office at St. Edward's University, and of course, my partner in the Holy Cross Institute office, Laura Sanders. I'd also like to make special mention and welcome today Dr. George Martin, President of St. Edward's University, who has also joined us for this webinar. We're joined today by more than 140 participants from throughout the United States and abroad. We're honored to have you with us. I'm particularly honored to welcome the many Brothers of Holy Cross who have elected to participate today. As well, we have current and former professors and administrators from St. Edward's University, alumni and trustees from the university, congregational and provincial leaders from the Brothers of Holy Cross, members of the Board of Governors from the Holy Cross Institute, and members of the faculty, staff, and administration from many of the Holy Cross primary and secondary schools in the US and abroad. This event today is being brought to you by the Holy Cross Institute at St. Edward's University. Founded in 2004 as a unique partnership between St. Edward's and the Moreau and Midwest provinces of the Brothers of Holy Cross, and a vision and dream of Dr. George Martin and Brother Stephen Walsh. This unique partnership is also a corporate entity of St. Edward's University and is headquartered on the campus. The Holy Cross Institute is governed by a Board of Governors, many of whom have joined us on this webinar. The Institute exists to further the application of the Catholic and Holy Cross educational mission of participating educational institutions, which include the 11 schools in the Moreau province, the 6 schools in the Midwest, and 1 Sisters of the Holy Cross school. Its effort involves education of the public about the values and philosophy of Holy Cross education, formation of board members, administrators, faculties, and staffs, students, and other members of the school communities in these values, and research into these values and their application in education and teaching in the present time and into the future. This is indeed a significant year in the history of the Brothers of Holy Cross as we celebrate this 200th anniversary, who, as you will learn tonight, the Brothers of St. Joseph became united with Father Moreau and the priests of the Diocese of Le Mans to form the Congregation of Holy Cross. The formation of the Brothers of St. Joseph by Father Jacques Dujarie came as a response to the needs of the post-French Revolutionary War and Napoleonic era in French history, when practicing religion had been suppressed, and that formal education was reserved only for the rich. Their goal was to prepare for better times than these, to provide their students with the competence to see and the courage to act, especially amidst a time of terrible injustice, a message that certainly resonates with us today. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen with you. So as we bring you today's webinar, a little bit of information, contact information for the Holy Cross Institute. I'll re-show this slide at the end of the presentation. We invite you to follow us on Twitter and Facebook to stay up to date on all of the activities of the Institute. As I shared a little bit with you the history of Holy Cross, today particularly we're going to focus on that period of time from 1820 to 1837. At which the Brothers of St. Joseph came together through that fundamental act of union with the auxiliary priests under Father Moreau's direction. 1841 was the arrival in the United States, University of Notre Dame founded in 1842, Holy Cross School in New Orleans in 1849, St. Edward's University in 1878, and today there are Holy Cross missions and ministries in 16 countries. As I mentioned, the Congregation of Holy Cross, and Brother George will talk a little bit more about how that name came to be, took place right outside of Le Mans in north central France. A couple of quick tips on Zoom. Since all of you have been muted, we invite you at any point to ask a question or comment through your chat feature. We do have some folks working behind the scenes that will gather those questions for me at the end as host, and I will present those questions to Brother George. We're going to save about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for that. If you run into any technical difficulties or you're having a hard time hearing, whatever it may be, please drop a question in chat and one of our folks behind the scenes will be able to help you. We do remind you that this is being recorded and this will forever be maintained through the archives at St. Edward's University and with the Holy Cross Institute. And we will also be posting it on our website probably sometime next week. We'll also be following up in a few days, sometime next week, with a post-event survey. So we hope that you will complete that and give us your feedback as we prepare for the 4 remaining webinars. And then last but not least, enjoy. So I'm delighted to present to you today our keynote speaker, Brother George Klawitter, who just recently celebrated 60 years as a Holy Cross brother. He resides at Columbia Hall on the campus of the University of Notre Dame. He's been a lifelong educator, including being a former professor at St. Edward's University and Holy Cross College. He's also a noted author and historian of at least 10 books. As with his English literature background, so some of those books in poetry and English literature, and of course many on the history of Holy Cross. Some of those books include this most recent book that came out, The Brothers of St. Joseph, Holy Cross in Algeria, The Early Men of Holy Cross, After Holy Cross, Only Notre Dame, and of course, just to show that he's also written with his English literature background, Let Orpheus Take Your Hand. So Brother George, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you for taking the time to prepare for this webinar, and we're very, very grateful that you can share your wisdom, your expertise with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. I'm delighted to be here. For many years, I've been almost obsessed with the history of the early brothers, the Brothers of St. Joseph, as they were originally known and called themselves for many years, even after they merged with the auxiliary priests in 1837. I want to add a few more dates into the dates that Marco gave you already, because any time we talk about the beginning of Holy Cross, we have to start with the French Revolution. 1789, it devastated the country not only politically, but morally, and certainly spiritually. The school system, which had been run by the church, was almost obliterated from the country. 3 years later, in 1792, began the Reign of Terror, and that simply added horror upon horror to what had been going on, not only in Paris, but around the country. Paris wanted everybody to join in on the atrocities, and those that resisted, like the city of Lyon, were severely punished. Well, finally, 9 years later, in 1801, Napoleon came in, and hooray for a dictator, I guess we can say. At last, he brought some kind of peace to the country, at least a nice concordance between the church and the government. That was 1801. That meant that priests who had gone into hiding, like Father Dujarie, to escape being guillotined because they refused to swear allegiance to the new government, priests like Father Dujarie could come out of hiding. Father Dujarie is one of our heroes, of course, a saintly man who went into hiding right before he was ready to be ordained. He was still a seminarian. That's not a picture of Father Dujarie. I think that's Marco Clark as a young man I'm seeing on my screen. Anyway, Father Dujarie went into hiding in Paris, preparing himself more for his ordination. At one point, he even disguised himself as a lemonade salesman to escape being detected by the authorities. When he was ordained in a secret ceremony on Christmas Eve in Paris, he was given the parish in Rouillé, 28 miles southeast of Le Mans. And he traveled there incognito and worked for several years sotto voce, letting no one know he was around except the people he ministered to. He would move during the night from farmhouse to farmhouse, sometimes walking barefoot in the snow, and then he would offer Mass and the sacraments to the people who were waiting for him in his new location. I was happy to be in the cellar of one of the buildings near Rouillé, where he said his first Mass in that area. It's now a kind of apartment, but the people who owned it let those of us who were in that institute at the time in to experience what Father Dujarie must have, where Father Dujarie was for his first Mass in that area. Well, he comes out of hiding in 1801 and he's given the parish of Rouillé, and that was going to be his parish for the next 35 years. He was a saintly man, beloved by his parishioners, and certainly beloved by the brothers. We have to start a little earlier because in 1806, just 5 years after the Concordat, he gathered 4 or 5 saintly young women together on about 5 miles outside of Rouillé in a little house that he built himself out of fieldstone. He called it La Petite Providence, the Little Providence. And those young women were devoted to teaching the girls in the area. And eventually they came to be known as the Sisters from the Petite Providence, or the Sisters of Providence. So that was in 1806. 12 years later, in 1818, Father Dujarie is at the summer retreat for priests in the Diocese of Le Mans. And the bishop says to him, well, you've had quite a bit of success with those young women that you've gathered together to teach the young girls in the area around Rouillé. How about starting an organization of young men who would do the same thing for the boys, who have gone almost a whole generation without any kind of formal education, especially in catechetics, in their religious fundamentals. So Father Dujarie, of course, agreed. It was his bishop after all. But he waited 2 years before he finally gathered the first few young men. So it was 1820, in July, 2 years after that push from the bishop, 1820, that the first recruit showed up at Rouillé, Pierre Hérault, in the middle of July, July 15th. And then a month later, a second young man showed up, Louis Duchesne. Neither of those 2 men were going to die as a brother of St. Joseph. They lasted a few years, Pierre, in fact, went away and then came back for a little time, but neither one of them survived. I've tried to capture what they may have been like in a play that I wrote for high school students about 5 months ago. And it's all hypothetical, of course, but I tried to capture in that little 3-act play what it was like in those first days, those first months at Rouillé. Well, after Louis Duchesne showed up in August, a few months later in October, then came the prize. And that prize was Brother Andre Maute. I'm reaching for a nice picture of him. There he is. That's nothing what he looked like because we don't have any photograph of him. He died just when photography was taking on. There he is on your screen now in the upper left-hand corner. These 5 pictures were done by Brother James Kane from the Moro province. And what Brother James did to do these wonderful pictures, he read the letters by these men and then he projected what these men might have looked like in reality. I don't care if they look like that or not. I love these pictures, and I have Brother Andre Maute hanging in my bedroom now, and I have Brother Hilarion, the 3rd man, the one on the far right. I have him hanging in my little walk-through library. Andre Maute, he's the important one. He's over on the far left. The 4th young man to show up at Rouillé is the man in the middle top, Brother Etienne, that's Stephen Gaufre. And he endured. He lasted a good long time. He taught for 13 years in one school, which meant that he must have been a well-accepted, well-respected teacher. Then there's my man, Brother Hilarion Ferton. He was on the 2nd mission to Algeria. He, in fact, was the superior. The 2nd time we went back to Algeria, that would have been in 1844. We had gone in 1840, but that first mission to Algeria ended in disaster 2 years later. Then Father Moreau sent Brother Hilarion and about 4 other brothers back to Algeria in 1844, and they lasted there until 1873. Unfortunately, not Brother Hilarion. This wonderful young man died about 5 years after he was in Algeria. But even though young, he wrote some fantastic letters back to Father Moreau that I was able to get my hands on in the General Aid Archives and translated and published them in a book with a lot of the other letters written by the brothers in Algeria. In the lower left-hand corner, that's Brother Leonard Guitouje. His is a sad story, and I'm not going to tell you about it today because I have so many other things to tell you about. And Brother Leonard Guitouje deserves some time in the sun all by himself. We finally honored him in the congregation by dedicating a floor to him at Columba Hall. Our 3rd floor is now dedicated to Brother Leonard Guitouje. The 1st floor is dedicated to Brother Andre Maute. The 2nd floor to Brother Vincent Pio, the great patriarch of the brothers in Notre Dame. The 3rd floor to Brother Leonard Guitouje, the renegade, and the 4th floor to Brother Hilarion Ferton. The last brother you see pictured is Brother Raymie. This is the man who outlived all the other 4 and became a kind of chronicler of the early days of Holy Cross. He was a champion of the uniting of the brothers and the priests into one congregation back in those days when men like Brother Leonard Guitouje were thinking and saying that it might not have been such a very good idea. Right now, I'm going to go back to a few more dates that I want to fill into Marco's original list, because in 1821, that is 1 year after the brothers started to amalgamate at Rouillé, they opened the first school. And as you might suspect, that first school was in Rouillé, and it was run by Brother Andre Maute, the 3rd brother to join. I'll say a little bit more about that when I start reading my paper to you. In 1831, another date that's very important because the brothers were on hard times. 1830, there was a mini revolution in France, not quite as horrendous as the one from 1789, but it did discombobulate the population of France. It lasted all of 4 days, but it certainly had some ill effects on the brothers of St. Joseph. They lost a number of their schools. I'll tell you how many later. And they lost about a third of their membership. Well, in 1831, at the annual retreat, Brother Andre Maute, their primary director, decided it was time to have a symbol of the faith and fidelity that they had in each other. So he drew up a nice, beautiful little pact of fidelity, and it was signed by 35 brothers, about a third of the men at the time. It was signed at the annual retreat. It's a very moving kind of document. In it, they say, for example, that if they do have to disband, they're going to stay in touch, and they'll always stay devoted to their founder, Father Dujarie. Well, Father Dujarie is getting old, and he's not so good at keeping things organized. He wasn't doing much of the organizing anyway. For 10 years, Brother Andre Maute had really been the kingpin. I'll say a little bit more about that later. But by 1835, Brother Andre sensed that if we're going to save this Brothers of St. Joseph organization, we've got to get a new priest at the head. So Brother Andre Maute went behind the scenes to the bishop, didn't tell Father Dujarie what he was doing, and wrote to the bishop, then met with the bishop and said, we've got to have a new man at the head. He probably even suggested Father Moreau, who was a known quantity to the brothers because Father Moreau had been helping with the annual retreat at the end of August every year at Rouillé for the brothers. So he was a known quantity. He wasn't just picked out of a hat to lead the brothers. Well, in 1835, the brothers assembled for their annual retreat, and in the chapel of the Grand Saint-Joseph, their novitiate building in Rouillé, they were told in the presence of the bishop that they would be transferring leadership, their fealty, from Father Dujarie to Father Moreau. It was a very tearful event. Many of the brothers didn't know what was going to happen to them that night. And when it was announced, there were quite a bit of sobbing and quite a bit of sighing in that chapel. So the brothers moved their novitiate and almost all of their personnel up to Le Mans, 28 miles northwest of the little town of Rouillé. Everybody goes up there except Brother Vincent Pio. He stays behind to run the school that Brother Andre had started, and a few of the other brothers to help close down the Grand Saint-Joseph, which was going to be sold because everything was moving lock, stock, and barrel up to Le Mans. Why? Well, Father Moreau had connections that Father Dujarie didn't have. Father Moreau knew the bishop personally. He was a classmate of his in the seminary. He had connections in government. He knew how to manipulate things. He was a great organizer. He was a man of great zeal, and he had terrific health, things that Father Dujarie did not have. So he gets the brothers up to Le Mans, and then 2 years later, as Marco pointed out, in 1837, he joins his priests. There were 5 priests in his little organization of auxiliary priests. They were diocesan priests who were formed to act as home missionaries in Northwest France. Those 5 priests, he joined to the Brothers of St. Joseph. There were 54 brothers left at the time, so they signed a fundamental pact in 1837 in the suburb of Le Mans known as Holy Cross, Saint Croix. So I maintain that the brothers of Holy Cross are still the brothers of St. Joseph. The problem is that French preposition de, when we were called Les Frères de Sainte Croix, the French were translating it as the brothers from Holy Cross, the suburb of Le Mans, Sainte Croix. But it has come down to us officially and informally as the Brothers of Holy Cross. I rather think of us as the Brothers of St. Joseph, still the Brothers of St. Joseph from Holy Cross. The two giants in the history of Holy Cross have always been Jacques Dujarie and Basil Moreau. But what if a third man were so important that without him, Dujarrier's brothers would have fallen into the footnotes of history, and Moreau's mixed community of priests and brothers would never have seen the light of day? What if? What if this man were schooled in religious spirituality more formally than Dujarie and supervised more classrooms than Moreau ever set foot in? What if such a man had a humility so ingrained that after 15 years of running the day-to-day operations of a religious organization of brothers, he accepted demotion and the humblest of tasks because he knew that the future of his brothers depended upon his unconditional submission? What if? What if such a man has been sidelined, more or less, in the history of Holy Cross, while Dujarie and Moreau have advanced in stature and renown, the latter well into the process of canonization? What if? Such a man, we would say, deserves resurrection. His indefatigable energy, his uncanny foresight, and his overpowering virtue need to be better acknowledged than they presently are. Most Holy Cross members, when they think about Brother André Maute, if they think about him at all, may consider him a kind of secretary to Father Dujarie and dismiss him as a somewhat important, if marginal and shadowy cog in the early wheel of the Brothers of St. Joseph. They probably know that of the three young men earliest to arrive at Rouillé in 1820, he was the only one to persevere, answering Dujarrier's call to rescue children from the ignorance left in the aftermath of the French Revolution. But when André arrived, the revolution was actually a generation previous, and Napoleon's Concordat, which reconciled church and state in a form still pretty much extant today, was 17 years old. André is often lost in the patter of history and survives only in a paragraph of Holy Cross history here and there as a man of some importance to the fledgling community at Rouillé. It took the brave Holy Cross archivist, Father Phileas Vanier, however, to proclaim André the second founder of Holy Cross. Dujarie first, André second, Moreau third. Today we are wary and incredulous that a non-ordained person could wear the title of second founder of Holy Cross, given to him by Father Vanier. Some smile at the title and accept it as a pious metaphor, a kind of testament to a man who lived with Dujarie and worked beside him for 15 years. Others are content to skip over the title as a historical gesture of no religious or practical significance because, after all, in the last years of his life, André worked in a clerical society and his vocation was narrowly based on the humility and obscurity of St. Joseph. But metaphor or not, the title reflects the actuality of André's work. In the words of Father Vanier, quote, 4 directors had been established to head the institute at Rouillé, but the last 3 are more assistants than equals. Brother André directs everything. He rules on everything and is the judge of last resort. He is responsible for formation of subjects. He is master of novices. He presides over all exercises, including meals. He gives all permissions. He resolves all difficulties between religious. He harries the lukewarm. He encourages the zealous. He gives direction. End of quote from Father Vanier. It is obvious that André was the visible head of the Brothers of St. Joseph, Dujarie being distracted by his parish duties and his increasingly problematic supervision of the Sisters of Providence. Someday we should talk about his problems with Mother General. It's interesting. It is Andre who makes the annual visits on foot to the scores of little schools run by the brothers in towns around the diocese. It is Andre who supervises day by day and year by year the ups and downs of the community. He is the first man for most decisions, even as Dujarie remains titular head of the brothers. Andre, in fact, fired one of the four brother directors, Henri Taupin. Now, if there is one thing you should take away from my little talk today, it is a realization that the brothers of St. Joseph were not dying on the vine in 1835 when they moved to Le Mans. In spite of the fact that all Holy Cross histories make much of the dwindling numbers and institutions of those brothers, the fact remains that the brothers were not dying, not at all, nor were their schools falling inevitably away from them. In 1835, when they passed themselves from the guidance of one priest over to another priest, they were 64 members strong and operating 25 schools. They were not a dying organization. Now I'm going to look at the early schools and try to convince you that the early brothers of St. Joseph in 1835 were viable and trusted as a religious teaching community. The first school was started, as I mentioned, in Rouillé itself, the group having begun in that town in July of 1820 with the arrival of the first brother. It makes perfect sense that Rouillé would be the logical starting point for foundations. Indeed, just 6 months after Pierre Hureau showed up at James Dujarier's rectory, a grade school was put under the direction of the third recruit, our brother André Maute. In February of 1823, just 3 months after he arrived, he was standing in front of a classroom of young boys eager to learn what they could from this man who had been a Larchant farmer all his life and had received rudimentary teacher training from Rouillé's father, Dujarie. Given André's later success as a mentor to young teaching brothers of St. Joseph, we can imagine that his energy and enthusiasm would have made up for any deficiencies he may have had in the mastery of math, grammar, catechism, and penmanship, the foundation of 19th century French education. I think all of us who have been teachers can agree with that. In our earliest days, our energy and enthusiasm very often made up for our lack of subject matter mastery. Brother André did get sent, however, to Le Mans for 5 months of teacher training, and he spent 6 months in Paris living with the Christian brothers to learn their methodology. On his return to Rouillé in the summer of 1822, he was invested with Brother Stephen with a religious habit on the road outside of town. Apparently that ceremony took place. There's a picture of it on the cover of one of the Holy Cross books I put together, of Father Dujarie giving the habit to 3 young men, 3 brothers of St. Joseph. That's wrong, sorry, it was only 2 young men, but Brother Harold Replinger, who painted this painting, had artistic reasons for trying to balance the painting. So it says 3 there, but there were only 2 who got their habit in the summer of 1822. While André was away studying, Brother Louis, Dujarier's second recruit, opened a school at Saint Denis d'Orc, and someone, we don't know whom, opened a school at Larchant, Brother André's hometown. The school at Saint Denis d'Orc had a brother teacher for 12 years, that is until 1833, and the school at Larchant for 8 years. The school at Rouillé remained under the brothers' direction for 49 years until 1870, a generation after both Brother Stephen and Brother André had passed away. So in 1821, the brothers had the direction of 3 schools. In 1822, they assumed direction of 7 more, a total of 10 schools in just 2 years, a rather phenomenal endeavor, especially given the fact that in the school year 1821 to 1822, Brother Andre Maute was not in Rouillé. How did the 7 schools opened in 1822 fare? Marson stayed under the brothers' care for 14 years, Montourtier 13. Saint-Germain-le-Guillaume and Ivry-l'Évêque lasted 9 years, and the other 3 schools lasted only a few years. Keeping track of which brother was running which school would have kept Brother Andre Maute on his toes, particularly in peak years. And he did visit schools once a year to check on teaching conditions and on the brothers. And in the peak year of 1828, there were 51 schools scattered in little towns around the Rouillé, some of them 80 miles away. So he did visit these schools, checked on the brothers, and he made very fine inventories of what was going on at the time. We can imagine that his visits were anticipated by the brothers who were dying to see someone from headquarters come and see them. So by 1828, they were running 51 schools. That's just 8 years after they were founded. You may as well say 7 years because they didn't have any schools in the first year. And then with the revolution in 1830, they dropped down 11 schools and they slipped down further until 1835 when they had only half of the schools left that they had in 1828. But still, when they were turned over to Father Moreau's direction in 1835, they were still running 25 schools. How'd they have so many schools? Well, there were a lot of little towns that had no religious educators because the Christian brothers who were working in the area for a century had in their rule that they could not teach in any place where there'd be fewer than 3 men in a house. They believed in community. Well, Father Dujarie came along and said, no, we'll have 1 brother for each town. So that did make their charism extremely different from the Christian brothers. Teaching in a one-room school would necessitate a great deal of energy and imagination to manage 40 boys or so in all 8 grades. 40 was a small number. Oftentimes there were up to 60 young people, grades 1 through 8, in one classroom with the brother in charge. Now this isn't so ancient. We have living in Columba Hall a brother, Brother Robert Mosier, who is 92 years old. And in his first year teaching in Holy Cross, he was sent to a grade school, one of our grade schools in New York City. And his first year, he was teaching 4th graders, 74 in one room. All year, he had 74 young 4th graders in one room. And he said most of the time in the winter, he spent his time wiping noses and putting on galoshes. I'm going to skip a little bit now because I see we're getting into the time where we want to start asking questions. So I'm going to skip some of the things that I had to share with you and go right to my ending. When all is reviewed, we must conclude that the brothers of St. Joseph were superbly effective in their apostolic works. Numbers do not lie. We have proof with a chart of school openings and duration for the first generation of the brothers of St. Joseph that they were effective. Even at their supposedly lowest moment, 1835, they were still running 25 schools in France, and 11 of those schools stayed under their care for 40 years or more. The brothers of St. Joseph, therefore, did not move their headquarters from Rouillé to Le Mans because they were dying. We would have to look elsewhere for another reason to explain that shift. Marco, I'm your man.
Well, brother, thank you. Just incredible. And, you know, in recent weeks, I've had the good pleasure to begin reading much of what you've written about the brothers of St. Joseph. Really very intrigued by the life of Andre Maute, and I have often wondered why, as you indicated in one of the books that you wrote, Brother Andre Maute, Pioneer of Holy Cross, and in quotes it says, "Remove my name every time it appears." So there's a certain humility that I hear about Brother Andre Maute, but also seemed like a workhorse and a born leader, an extraordinary leader, with difficulties communicating from town to town at great distances. So, I wonder if you wouldn't tell us a little bit more, what we know more about Brother Andre Maute's upbringing, his own training, and then how did he pass that training on to these young brothers who were going out into the countryside alone?
Well, the setup for training young brothers then is pretty much like it is today. There was a one-year novitiate that focused on their spiritual life, and then they would stay around for a year or more to do their scholastic training. So we still have that, although the scholastic training is longer now. Sadly, some of those young men were sent out with only a few months of training, and they would show up in classrooms where they would have to teach children who may know more than they did. I remember my first year teaching. In fact, I was teaching in Michigan in the Brothers High School. I was 21 years old teaching that group of seniors, and I had a student in class. He was 20 years old. He flunked. It haunts me still. But Brother Andre had the duties of training them spiritually as novice master, and then he also had the duty of training them in mathematics, in French grammar, in penmanship, in bookkeeping, and catechetics when they became scholastics. And I suspect that even while they were novices, he was already trying to train them in some of those subjects that they'd be teaching when they got out into those little schools. I always envied math teachers. Anything they know is light years ahead of the students they're going to face. Whereas if you're an English teacher like I was all those years, you bring a poem into class and everybody has an opinion about the poem that's as good as yours. So I think when Andre would teach these young men a little bit of math, they were ready to go out to those farm towns and teach these young men who knew nothing about algebra or geometry.
It's just fascinating to me, brother. And so we have a question that's come in from Rosemary Burchick. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And she teaches the history of the Brothers of St. Joseph and the Congregation of Holy Cross to her freshman students at Holy Cross High School in Flushing, Queens, New York. Brother, the question is what do you feel is the most important thing for her students to know?
Most important thing, what?
For her students to know about
the Brothers of St. Joseph?
The Brothers of St. Joseph, right?
Well, they were successful. They were wonderful teachers, and they had a wonderful sense of community. Even though they were separated from each other for most of the year, they would get together only for 2 weeks in August as a community back in Rouillé for their annual retreat, and they looked forward to that mightily. Now that continued, by the way, even into Indiana, where we had one young brother in the early days back in 1842, who was all by himself down on the Ohio River in Madison, and he didn't see a brother all year, and he was just so happy to get back up to Notre Dame. He had to walk to get up there in the summertime for the annual retreat. That would be from the Ohio River on the southernmost border of Indiana up to the northern part where Notre Dame is. So I think that beautiful sense of community that the brothers had was one of their charisms, one of their strongest things. They just liked each other, coming from the backgrounds they did, and having that solid sense of what they had to do. They had this generation of uneducated boys who needed education, not just in their catechetics and their religion, but also in the solid things of, I didn't mean to say that. Catechetics is solid, but they needed training too in mathematics and French grammar, penmanship and bookkeeping. So I think that in answer to her question, I would have to say that beautiful sense of community that kept them wanting those schools to be successful, that kept them together.
Yeah, brother, as a young student myself at Bishop McNamara High School in 1981, what really made an impact on me immediately was that sense of community from the brothers. It was very attractive. as a vocation, as a way of life. There was a certain level of joy and comradeship and camaraderie and brotherhood, and it was really very attractive. And I think that with so many of our schools, all of our schools now today, being led by lay leaders, establishing that sense of community, or what we refer to as the Holy Cross family, has to be one of those top priorities. I'm also, I'm intrigued by, I've got a couple of great questions that are coming in here, and so I want to jump to them. First off, Dan Curtin, a longtime friend, says hello, and he thanks you for this great presentation, and he asked about the remains of the early archives of Holy Cross. So if somebody wanted to dive in a little bit more deeply, what are the remains of the early archives of Holy Cross?
Everything from the early days is now housed at Notre Dame. So everything from Father Dujarie's correspondence, what we have of it, Brother Andre Maute's correspondence, everything is housed in the main library, the Hesburgh Library at Notre Dame, where anyone can have access to it. The thing that broke my heart when I was working on this last book, the Brothers of St. Joseph, what broke my heart is I worked in the archives for a month or two with a ledger that Brother Andre Maute kept from 1830 to 1835. And in it, he recorded the names and the backgrounds of every brother who showed up. He recorded the obediences, what schools the brothers were going to. He recorded that ceremony that took place in 1835 when the brothers were transferred from Dujarie to Morrow. It's a wonderful, wonderful ledger book. It's over 100 pages long, all in his own handwriting. I just treasured that book. Well, he had a ledger from 1820 to 1829, and it's gone. It can't be found. And if you can imagine what we could learn from that first ledger book, I know it exists because he refers to it 3 or 4 times in the second volume. He keeps referring to it, but the archivist can't find it. So I figure somebody in the days when archives were a little more loosely supervised, someone said, oh, this is interesting, and took it to their room. And then that person died, and the superior came in to clean out things and saw this old book and said, oh, this old thing, and pitched it. That's my fear. My hope is that the archivist in the Notre Dame Library is going to find a box hidden in a corner, and in that box is going to be this ledger from 1820 to 1829 with all the good stuff in it.
And brother, with the significant numbers of brothers, what was the peak number of Brothers of St. Joseph? Did you say that in your presentation?
I did not say that in my presentation. I accessed the number of 64 for the time, let's see, 54 signed the Pact of Fidelity. No, 35 signed the Pact of Fidelity, but there were twice that many. Some of them had left the retreat early and didn't sign the document. They didn't even know about it. And then the number 64, I'm picking that out of the air for, well, anyway, I think it'd be safe to say there were 100, under 100 when the transfer was made.
Yeah, and I remember reading numbers somewhere in one of what you've written.
Yeah, I've got all those numbers in this book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm hawking this book.
There you go. And is there much written in French history? You know, considering the fact that there were at one point 58 schools, it sounds like there probably were thousands of young people that were taught by the brothers over that period of time. Anything written in French history about the Brothers of St. Joseph?
I've never researched that part of French history. There's so little written about, well, there might be in a history of the French church. Would probably be a footnote, but I presume most of the ink would have been given to the Christian brothers. They were numerous and they were solid. They were the first group of religious that were invited back into France by Napoleon, the Christian brothers. Well recognized and solid in their formation and in their teaching. So I don't know. I haven't done any of that background in the French books of French history.
Yeah.
I doubt if there's much there on the Brothers of St. Joseph.
Terrific. We've got another couple of questions that are coming in here. A few questions, brother, around the play that you've written. In fact, one of these comes from Katie Gone, who is a theater arts alumna from St. Edward's University. So appropriately, she wonders if you can share a little bit more about your play and how we can make it available to the schools for use.
I have to say to Katie that this question makes me angry at Al Altamont, who had a play produced there at St. Edward's on Vivaldi about, let's see, it must be going on 20 years now. And he knows about my play, and he didn't bring it over to Katie. It's a 3-act play, and it was put online a month ago by the General Administration. And if Katie can't find it, I'll be glad to send it to her. It's a 3-act play about the early brothers, specifically focusing on Andre Maute. It's called Waiting for Andre. You see, Samuel Beckett stole my title for some lackluster play called Waiting for Godot. Took that, stole it from me. So Waiting for Andre, Katie, I recommend that you look at that. It's one thing to read a dry history book like this, The Brothers of St. Joseph, where you fall asleep. And then it's another thing to see a play about the early brothers or even read it. There's quite a bit of humor in the first act. In fact, the time when Brother Andre shows up at Rouillé in October of 1820, little humor in there. Somebody said to me, did this really happen? I said, it's theater. Anything happens in theater. Live with it.
So one of the last slides that I'll show before we sign off today actually has links for those that want to do some additional research. And one of those links is to the General Administration website for the congregation in Rome, where your play is posted. So I'll make sure that everybody has that, and we'll be sending follow-up emails to all of the attendees as well. We have a couple of quick questions here too. So Peter Shelley from Moreau Catholic High School in Hayward, California says he's struck by the story of Brother Vincent Pio in Early Men of Holy Cross. Moreau's choice to let a young Soren be the leader over the much more experienced Brother Vincent in their new sojourn to Indiana is striking. Why? And could you reflect on that?
I sure can, and I would recommend that the questioner, I missed his name, I got distracted because I know Bruce, who is active there at Hayward, but I would recommend that, let's see, he look at the Fundamental Pact of 1837, because I think it's Article number 9 in Morrow's handwriting. He wrote the pact that would join the priests and the brothers. Article 9 is that all major superiors will be priests. That was not true under Father Dujarie. Under Father Dujarie, all members of the community were brothers and they were all equal. But Morrow put together the priests and the brothers, and sadly, number 9, I believe it's number 9, the article says that in this new congregation, this new community fused brothers and priests, the priests will be the major superiors. So coming over to America in 1841, Vincent Pio was 44. He was a longtime member of the community. He was number 17 to join back in the early days of the Brothers of St. Joseph. He was one of the 4 brother directors. He's the patriarch of the group of 7 coming over to America. But Father Moreau put Edward Soren in charge. Edward Soren was 28 years old, so he was quite a bit younger than Brother Vincent Pio. But I have to say, Morrow knew what he was doing. Edward Soren had this bravado about him that gave rise to a quite fabulous pair of institutions, one in Austin and one in northern Indiana. And Brother Vincent Pio was not much at being a superior. He was sent to New Orleans in 1849 to run the orphanage we had there that eventually became Holy Cross School, as still going today, our oldest high school in existence. And after 2 years, he wrote to Father Soren and said, get me out of here, I can't handle the brothers. Well, Father Soren could handle brothers, he could handle anybody. So it was probably an act of grace that he was in charge of the 7 men coming over to America. and not the patriarch, Brother Vincent. But we love Brother Vincent. We even name a unit of buildings after him in Austin.
Yes, indeed, indeed. A couple of additional questions. We have about 5 minutes, brother. So this comes from Adrian Jackson, who is at Holy Cross School, New Orleans, brother's alma mater, as he reminds me. And he asks, why don't we talk more about Father Dujarie? He laid the foundation and Father Moreau saw the plan through. But why is it that there's not more discussed about Father Dujarie?
Father Dujarie had a kind of vague plan of what he wanted. And at one point, in fact, he wanted priests to join his little community. And he invited a couple to come, one of whom was Father Moreau. Well, none of them joined. One showed up. I don't think Father Moreau ever even followed through on the visit. But one priest did show up, stayed 2 days, and went home. And then in one of the 3 letters that Brother Andre wrote to the bishop about getting a new priest director, he spells out that he wanted a community of 3 branches. He wanted the brothers of St. Joseph, he wanted priests, and he wanted men who taught in the schools who were not brothers or priests. That was his vision for Holy Cross. And Father Moreau was privy to that. Brother Andre, I'm sure, confided that in him. But then when Father Moreau came along with his vision, he kept the priests and the brothers united, and he wanted joined to that the group of women that were the sisters of Holy Cross. Originally, the 3 were in one congregation, but Rome said, no, we won't approve those constitutions until you get the women off in their own congregation. So Father Dujarie is a saintly, holy, wonderful man with a nice little sense of humor, but he is not the organizer that Father Moreau was. Father Dujarie's group was held together, I think, because of Brother Andre's energy and hard work and his charism for organizing people. Father Moreau didn't need Brother Andre. Father Moreau was his own man. Does that answer his question? I forgot to put y'all in there. He's from New Orleans. Does that answer y'all's question?
That's right. That's terrific. And Dinah Kennard at St. Edward's University asked about any historical markers that remain in Le Mans, Rouet, and of course those that have had the opportunity to attend the international session, which is hosted by the Marionite Sisters of Holy Cross. It's an extraordinary trip. And so I know that St. Edward's University sent a cohort last summer. Unfortunately, they were not able to send a group this summer due to COVID-19. But I'm going to ask one last question here, brother, and it comes from another Holy Cross brother, Brother Joseph McTaggart. And he says, in this time of transition, what specific thoughts do you have as such good men and women take charge and continue the teaching mission of the Brothers of Holy Cross in Holy Cross schools?
Well, I don't know if it's a tradition so much as a continuation. I think that the Brothers of St. Joseph are still around, and they are now the people teaching and administering in our schools. The men and women who are imbued with the charism of Holy Cross, the teaching philosophy of the brothers that made St. Edward's University so fine in its early day right up into the present time, that charism has continued. And it's my hope, and I think the hope of the brothers, most of them, that the Brothers of St. Joseph continue on through the help of the Holy Cross Institute to be Holy Cross as it has always been, the Brothers of St. Joseph.
And brother, thank you for that. We also had someone who asked if I would put this slide back on the screen, which does show the original congregational seal, the smaller one on the right there. And you do see the Sacred Hearts of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph pictured there. I also, as you speak about the work of the Holy Cross Institute, there's some really wonderful resources available. And I've listed all of these here. The Midwest Province of Brothers, their website is there. We have the Moreau Province of Brothers. Then there's the Congregation of Holy Cross General Administration in Rome, and that's where the foundation video can be found. That's also where the 3-act play can be found. In fact, I also think that the three-act play is also in the Midwest Province website. There's also the Holy Cross History Association for anybody who wants to dive in and learn more about this rich history that we're a part of. And our next webinar series will focus on, will include members of that Holy Cross History Association. St. Edward's University alumni are reminded that they can stay connected through your Alumni Association website. And then, of course, there's Holy Cross Vocations, those that may be interested or discerning, would like to learn more about vocations of within Holy Cross as a Holy Cross priest or brother. And I would remind you as well that, as you mentioned, the Holy Cross Institute, of our contact information, brother. And we hope that you'll follow us on Twitter and Facebook, visit our website. Certainly, you are welcome to email myself or Laura directly at any time, anybody that may have some questions. And we, again, are going to be following up with an email in the days to follow this event with some additional information and a survey for everyone to complete. And then we want to remind you that we do have the other 4 parts of this 5-part series: September the 24th, October the 22nd, November the 19th, and then December 17th. We'll be joined by Brother Paul Bednarczyk, among others, who will be coming to us from Rome, Italy. And so I really want to take this opportunity again to thank all of you who participated today, just really very edified by an overwhelming number of participants in this first ever Holy Cross Institute production webinar celebrating the 200th anniversary of the educators, pioneers, disciples known as the Brothers of St. Joseph. And Brother George, what a treat this has been for us today. Thank you for taking time, for being with us, and for sharing your wisdom and your insights and your passion about the contributions that the Brothers of St. Joseph, and continuing today, the Brothers of St. Joseph, the Congregation of Holy Cross, continue to make in our world and on society. I'll close as Father Moreau closed. Christian education, he spoke about this work as a work of resurrection, and he says, hurry then, let us continue this work of resurrection. So everyone, let us continue to be disciples with hope to bring. Thank you all again for joining, and we say goodbye. Take care, everybody.